So I'm Pascale and I'm based in Marlow in England, 3 o'clock in the morning here. And the topic of our session today is enjoy school again. So helping parents when their child is unhappy in school. And hopefully you can see my background, classic Calvin and Hobbes. So I started in this field from school refusal. That's actually what brought me to solution focused was working in school refusal. So I was a school refusing child when I was 7, and then one of my daughters has been homeschooled for the last 5 years and had problems with school before then. And the other one is very happy in school. And also, I used to design schools. So, my background is in architecture, and I used to design schools, including alternative provision for children with social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. So, I'm coming at this from 3 different angles, and it was that working with parents who experience similar problems um, that brought me to Solution Focused. I first met Elliot and online and then trained with Brief. And here I am some years later. And one thing that I've noticed from talking with parents is that I've never met anyone who doesn't have a strong opinion about school and strong memories about school as well. So I'm going to this is going to be an interactive session, so hopefully you'll get involved answering the questions. And I've got a few questions that I've set up on my background. So hopefully you can see that. Can someone give me some sign in the chat or a thumbs up if you can see the question behind me? Should be there. Yep, great. Thank you, Liz. Um, so my kind of innovative scale, boiled cabbage to ice cream, so 0 to 10. On a typical day, how much did you enjoy school? So if you can, type in the chat if you're able to. May not be possible if you're on a mobile phone, but if you can, melted ice cream, I like that, Kerry. So if you can type in the chat, just put a number or put, some sort of a food um, that would give you the equivalent of a scale of how much did you enjoy school on a typical day? And I have to say, mine would fluctuate a lot depending on different factors. And it's great. So everyone's kind of people in the middle, ice cream with boiled cabbage. Depends on which grade. 8, 6, 5, 6. Great. So my next question to you is, I can get is it this one? I hope it's this one. Yeah. So what is, and you can just think about this in your mind because I think it will take a long time if everyone's typing, but what is one really strong memory of school that you have? So if you just think, what's the first memory that comes up of school? And just think in your mind, like, how old were you? Where were you? Who was there with you? And was it a positive or a negative memory? Um, and just thinking about that, and I use these questions with parents because I want them to put themselves in the shoes of the child, which can be quite difficult sometimes to remember, a long time ago when we were in school. And I found that these sorts of questions will help them, and they're neutral, right? But people will quite often have either a very strong positive response of, I had this great teacher and there was this fun thing that happened, or, being with their friends, or they might have a really negative response and say, there was this terrible time that I still haven't forgotten, that, somebody was mean to me, or I lost my confidence, or I did something stupid that I regret. And people just have very strong responses to that question. So it helps them to then relate to how their child might be feeling, because I'm principally working with parents and often helping them to prepare for conversations with school. So I'm often not talking to the child, mostly not. And so the next question, so some great answers in there. The teacher who was interested in me, thank you, Sandy, supported me to be the best I could be. Or sports day, Estelle, 8 years old, dad was there helping run it. And the people who are in the room or in the location with you are so important. And the next question is, what's one skill you had in school that you believe was valuable but was never mentioned on your school report? And there's a variation of a solution focused question from the very first session I ever did, um, or took part in. That was sorry, my Zoom is being strange and thinks that I'm speaking Spanish, which is odd. Yeah, so the question was, what's a skill that you have that you believe to be valuable that you wouldn't put on your CV? I think it was Bieber's question. So yeah, just thinking about what kinds of skills, again, another question that I sort of warm-up questions with parents. And I'm writing all of this to put in a book as exercises that people can do on their own. So I'm always looking for exercises that people are able to do on their own. Also, in my coaching, I do a lot of work asynchronously. So I work a lot through text messages or through Facebook Messenger, etc. And so I'm not always, it's not always a one-to-one conversation, as in they might answer asynchronously. So I'm giving them things that will sort of give them something to think about, and creates that rapport as well, that if we're not always in a Zoom call. Yeah, so leadership, self-reliant, whatever adult opinions of me were. That's great. And what's my next question? Next warm-up question. Have I got this one here? Yeah, so finally, on my version of the best hopes question, which is, how might our 55 minutes together be useful for you? And what do you want to get or learn, or what do you want to give or share in this session? And what energy do you want to bring? And this one, I would like people to put in the chat, what would you like to get? What are your best hopes from being in this session? Because I know some people are going to be school counselors or maybe family therapists or parents, or just have a specific reason why they're working with schools. You might be teachers as well. Actually, a lot of the people that a lot of the parents I talk to are teachers as well. And they're not always confident talking with the school about their children's struggles or finding, partly because they're so aware of the challenges, the limitations that schools have. So what are your best hopes for this session being useful? If you could pop that in the chat, that would be great. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And my best hopes would be to have fun and meet some great people and get some ideas as well, and some feedback on my ideas, and maybe some new things that I could be doing working with parents. So I'm hoping I might pick up a strategy for how my now adult son reframes his awful school experience. Yep, a lot of people I talk to actually are concerned about somebody who maybe is not in school anymore, often a family member. Another one. When gaming is more important to them than being at school, how to get them to school? Yeah, that's a big one. Very common now. If it's not gaming, it's social media or something like that. And I think gaming can be a refuge for children who are very stressed. Um, how to inspire parents with working towards their best hope in helping their child in school. Yeah, exactly. We are supporting our children and learn something new from working with parents. Great. Okay. So I will try to weave those into what I'm saying. Um, and feel free to put questions in the chat. I will come to them at the end or, when it's appropriate. Um, and so I'll just briefly step through my approach and how I'm working with this, try to create a sort of handbook that parents can use online or printed. And essentially there are three sections, and the first section is about, what's happening and understanding what's happening. And it's a bit of a dilemma for me because to stay solution focused with that, because I feel that there's a lot that needs to be said about recognizing signs of distress. So I talk about downward spirals and upward spirals. So, the downward spiral of how many conditions can sort of converge to lead into a problem getting quite big over time. And then, but the fact that you can then start to create an upward spiral. So you may not have kind of solved the downward spiral that your child's experiencing, but you can start to create this upward spiral of building confidence, etc. And those two can be happening in parallel. So it's acknowledging, the Bill O'Hanlon phrase, 1 foot in acknowledgement and 1 foot in possibility. So acknowledging what's happening and then also acknowledging that other possibilities exist and you don't always have to be solving the problem. Um, I've thought about this a lot because when I talk to parents, often what happens is that they have a lot to tell me and I'm not asking them any questions about what's happening specifically, but they want to offload. And I've noticed it's not just that they feel they need to explain, it's actually that they feel that they haven't been heard. And when I talk to Chris Iveson and some other solution focused people about, you know, so much of the session might be taken up by them just explaining the situation, because often this has been going on for months, if not years. And they said, oh, it's, just sometimes people need to talk. And if them being heard is a new thing for them, if it's different for them that someone's actually listening and validating their experience, whereas before maybe they've been dismissed or the problem has been minimized, they've gone into school and the school has said, oh, but they're fine in school, we're not seeing it. And they feel very frustrated. So it might be different from a situation where someone is, in family therapy and they've been through a sort of social services thing where they talk a lot about the problem and repeating it would not necessarily be helpful. Actually, them being heard can be a positive thing. And again, we talk about recognizing signs of distress and signs of thriving. And again, I was thinking maybe looking at signs of distress isn't very solution focused, but there's two reasons why I do it. And one of them is that actually recognizing the signs of distress could be new. So a parent, and I know this myself as a parent and having been a child in this situation, sometimes there just isn't that recognition or that acknowledgement of the signs of distress, and they're not always simple to see. So I found that parents do value having just a list that we can go through, or encouraging them to look for note. So it's about the positive thing of them noticing what's happening with their child. And when they realize that they have noticed a lot of things, they're often realizing that they are very attuned to their child's experience, and they are listening, and they are validating their child's feelings rather than dismissing them, which is quite often what's happening in the school environment. Oh, you're not really bored in my class, are you? That's one that I got when I was a kid. Kind of well-meaning gaslighting. Oh, just cheer up and you'll be fine. You'll just get them in and they'll be fine once, they'll get into the swing of it. Or, that kind of thing. So there's a real lack of recognition and allowing children to be distressed in the school environment and to say, yeah, it's distressing. It's very stressful. It's a very unnatural environment. It's very unnatural for a child to be with hundreds of strangers and not have any family members around to feel safe. It's very unnatural for them to be in such a noisy environment. So for a lot of children, the sensory aspects can be very hard on them. And so looking at the signs of distress and then the signs of thriving, and we do again a bit like the downward spiral and upward spiral, it's having that balance of acknowledgement and possibility. So the signs of thriving, what's your child like when they are thriving? How do they behave when they want to go to school, or previously when they have wanted to? Or how do they behave when, they want you to go and get them an ice cream, or they want to go to the park, or they're going to go and stay with a friend? So it's being able to allow the acknowledgement of distress, but then also looking out for and tuning into the signs of thriving. And if we do this in a group, we've done this with the parents group, we put them up on the board. We have a, big sort of flip chart, and we put what are all the possible signs of distress, what are the possible signs of thriving. And parents will say, when I was a child, one of the signs of distress I had was this, and no one picked it up. And they're happy to see that on the board. And also it's about them noticing that their experience might be really different from their child's experience, which is not something that people necessarily have really thought about. And I certainly see that with my children. I've got twins, two girls, but they're really different. And I notice the things that I resonate with more than I pick up on things that maybe aren't so much in my own experience. So that's the first part. We're kind of looking at what's happening and starting to put in those ideas of upward spirals and signs of thriving. And then the second part is about barriers to learning and supports for learning. And again, we're looking at barriers to learning because they are really important. For example, unrecognized neurodivergence can be something that people just aren't aware of. So there's a level of awareness that people need. And I'm not telling them what's happening, but I'm just opening up a space for them to explore what might be happening as a way of them recognizing. And then looking at supports for learning. And they might be all sorts of things around the body and the mind and sensory experiences in school, the sense of self, confidence, motivation. And then also in terms of people, interactions with people, and what what makes them feel confident in school is often the people that are around. And we experience that ourselves at work or in other leisure situations, that we might be very confident doing an activity with people that we trust, and really not confident or not willing to do that activity if there are people there who we think might be mean or mocking or dismissive or competitive with us, etc. So, and then we look at the third part, which is really the important, these are all kind of preamble parts. The third section is about effective conversations between parents and school. And that's really when parents talk to me. It's often, I noticed, it's when they have a meeting with the school coming up. They think it's not going to go well. It's not gone well in the past, or they're not sure how to handle it. And they don't feel that there's a lot of trust and teamwork happening between the parents and the school, which often is the case. And for all sorts of reasons, it's not necessarily the school's doing anything wrong, but they have limited time and resourcing, etc. And they're focused on some things, and maybe the parents are focused on other things. And there often is this lack of communication that what parents are seeing at home before and after school is not at all the same child as the school is seeing. Um, and and so the child is having the experience of school, but can't necessarily articulate it, can't necessarily explain it very well. And obviously age is a barrier to that, but also at every stage, I think there are difficulties with explaining or not wanting to explain things, not really knowing what's happening. And and then the at school, the teachers have some view of the child, limited. And at home, the parents have some view aspect of, you know, they talk to the child about school before, in the morning getting ready for school when it's really difficult. And then maybe when the child comes home and they might be one of the explosive after school exploders, the Coke bottle that's been shaken all day, and then they hold it in all day at school, but when they get home, they just rage for an hour. And they're really, really distressed, but they've been holding it in all day. So the school genuinely are not seeing it and not seeing the problem because the child is so busy masking, holding it in, behaving well, being, compliant and not disruptive. But at home, they're just, they're in their safe place with their safe people and they can let it all out. So the parent school conversation is really important. And everything I hear from parents who, when I ask them, actually, the last couple of days, I was thinking, I don't have enough examples of good examples of parent school communication. So I asked again in various groups, can somebody give me some examples of where it's gone well and what worked well? And pretty much everybody said, either the school got in touch with us because they noticed a problem, or when we got in touch with them, they would say, well, we aren't seeing it, but if you're seeing a problem, then we need to talk about it. Compared to the times when the parent would say, we think there's a problem, and the school just said, nope, no problem at all. They're fine in school, probably a problem at home. The parent felt blamed, and the parent felt not listened to. And then that's kind of the end of the conversation, which is a curious thing, but it does happen a lot. And so trying to get that effective conversation between parents and schools, and that's really what I want to, ask for your ideas on in this session, which is, we'll put the on here. No, we've had that one already. Yeah. So what makes an effective conversation between parents and school? So this is the bit that I'm working on now. And I'm wondering how many we can get to between us. Got 13 people in the room. So following Chris Iveson's delight of having ridiculously long lists, we can start putting some things in the chat. And one of the things I would put in there would be trust or mutual respect, having a conversation about teamwork. So feel free to put your ideas into the chat and then we can all learn from each other. So what makes an effective conversation between parents and schools? And one thing that I do when I'm helping parents to prepare for meetings is that I will use solution-focused questions to ask them. We'll think about before, during, and after the meeting. So preparing for the meeting beforehand, making sure you know what the purpose of the meeting is and what you want to get from it. During the meeting, what happens if they say this, where has it gone wrong before? Or, how would you be able to stay calm in a situation where you don't feel that they're listening, for example? And then after, what do you hope will happen after? But the thing that I'll do is I'll do it backwards. So I'll start with the desired outcome, preferred future. Suppose the meeting goes really well. by some miracle, the meeting that you've got tomorrow afternoon goes really well. And what happens next? And parents find it quite easy to talk about that because they've spent a lot of time concerned about how it might go wrong. They often haven't thought that much about what would actually look like if it went right. What do they actually want the school to do and follow through on, even if they don't have the magic button to make it happen? But we can explore what is the desired outcome from the meeting that they're going to have, and how do they want to feel afterwards about how they handled it, whether it went well or badly. What's the relationship they want to have with the school after that meeting? And that I found is really helpful for people. And then we work back from that and say, okay, so you want to come out of the meeting feeling proud that you've advocated on behalf of your child. You feel that your child in the meeting was able to be heard. And also you understand a little bit better the school's perspective, for example. And then, how would you handle that during the meeting? Things go well, things don't go so well. What are the things that you definitely want to cover? And then so before, what would you want to prepare? And parents often haven't thought about preparing the desired outcome, the future, before the meeting. And so in this way, they can go in thinking, well, I know that afterwards I want to have this sustained working relationship with the school. I want to have more trust, be acting as a team around the child together. Or sometimes their desired outcome might be, I would want to decide whether I'm taking my child out of this school, or I'm going to, maybe homeschool them or find a different school, or I'm going to decide now if I'm going to be making a formal complaint against the school, or if I'm going to be having a conversation with the school governors because I don't feel that the head teacher is listening, or I don't think that they're following their policies, or I'm going to talk to the local authority because I don't think the school is doing their job, or they're not accommodating my child's needs, they're not doing their job in terms of their neurodivergence requirements, etc. So we work backwards and that helps. So that's one thing that I found works well. And I've also used it myself in conversations with the school, and I've seen it, things improving over time. And when I talk to schools as well, they really want to be able to have these conversations with parents because they know that if the conversations don't go well, they spend more time dealing with the problem than if they can work together. And it often does depend on which person in the school is going to be responsible and take responsibility for helping the child to be happy again. And another thing that I've noticed is that in terms of thinking about how do we get on the same page as a team between the school and the parents, and obviously what the child wants as well, is that it's quite often they start kind of parents want one thing, child wants another thing, school wants a third thing, and nobody's agreeing. But there's one thing that seems to be that parents and schools can agree on, which is if the sort of magic phrase of how can we help the child access their learning? And it sort of focuses everybody on this idea of accessing the learning, not just achieving, getting, turning up for their exams. It's not about just attendance, turning up in the morning. It's actually, can they access their learning? Because if they're really struggling with some sensory processing, or if they're afraid, or if they're completely dehydrated because they're not drinking at school, because they're too afraid to go to the toilets. These are really common things that happen. And so the school might not be aware of that happening, but if the parent, the child tells them that this is happening, if you can frame it in the way of, can we help them to access their learning, then you're kind of in this zone of that is the school's remit. And I think a lot of the time the conversation ends up going a bit sideways because the parent wants the child's mental health to be protected and certain supports for learning, but the school really feels that it's not really their role to do that. And so there's sort of a conversation, oh, maybe you should talk to the GP or maybe you should get them a therapist. And the school's not thinking about what they could be doing to help. But if you're talking about accessing their learning, it's not just about content of curriculum, it's not about exams, it's not about motivation, etc. All of those things are involved. But parents and schools can agree on if the child was able to access their learning, that's why they're in school. And if they're not learning anything, why are they there? So that just seems to be a sort of magic phrasing that schools appreciate, certainly in the UK. Um, and then from that, you can have a conversation about their mental health and about anxiety or gaming or whatever it is that we think is not helping or them not sleeping, etc. Um, and then with the child, obviously, there's an element of parents needing to advocate on behalf of their child, sometimes with the child in the room and sometimes not. And I'm very strong saying that the parent needs to advocate on behalf of the child. I don't think it's appropriate for a child to have to advocate on their own behalf in school when they're 6 years old or 16 years old. I just don't, they don't have, the power dynamic is just too big. And so schools will sometimes not really want the parents to be there because, they just want the parents to drop the child off and not ask any questions and pick them up again at the end of the day. But I, I do believe that it's just not fair on a child that they should have to advocate for themselves like, with adults who have this huge power dynamic in school. So it's more appropriate to have at least one adult, a parent, and possibly other external providers as well to support. So right, let's see how many we've got in the chat. That's enough of me talking. And then we'll ask some questions. So here we go. So yeah, so collaborative, understanding. I'm going to note how many we've got. Collaborative, understanding, taking the time as long as they need. Yeah, that's very true. Things can take months and months to sort out, but school refusal problems or these kinds of issues can last for years, and the negative effects can last a whole lifetime. Being heard, yes, on both sides as well. Showing empathy, yeah. Open-mindedness, that they can identify by by appearance and they respond to my emails requesting a meeting. Yeah, so responsiveness and showing interest, showing care. Strengths-based rather than discussing all the issues. Yeah, sometimes you could be going around in circles on the issues. Being able to have a conversation with them about what the child's strengths are rather than what they're doing wrong and sort of, non-compliant behaviors. Can the counsellor approach my son rather than expecting him to approach the counsellor, given he's becoming more and more withdrawn? Yeah, that's a really good question. How is the school, if there is some sort of pastoral support within the school, what's that process? How does that work? And really understanding as a parent how the school works, because, I don't know how parents can really navigate the school system. I worked for years with schools as an architect, redesigning schools and in head teachers' offices. So I understand why the school system is like it is and what it can do and what it can't do. And I still find it confusing. So that, I think, is the school's responsibility to explain to parents how the system works, as well as explaining to children, possibly several times over, how the support systems actually work. And I think you're right that not expecting the child to be approaching adults, especially adults they don't know, it's if you think of the analogy of if this was happening in the workplace as an adult, how do you think that you would be going to HR on your own and feel confident doing that or talking to your boss? It's the equivalent. So we're expecting children to do things that we as adults in the workplace would not be particularly confident doing. and probably would want there to be someone else with us to help. So yeah, I think it's that, we have to do that mediation. We have to be opening the doors and making those conversations happen, which is not always easy. But maybe having, as a parent, using solution focused skills to actually, as a parent, talk to the counsellor, and whether the child's there or not, maybe having the conversations with the child at home and then having the conversations with the counsellor in the school. So you're bringing to the table what the child wants to have heard. What else? And then also having not only the counsellor, but also whoever is responsible within the school for your child's welfare. And I'm just quite, mostly parents haven't thought about that question. Is there one person in the school who's taking responsibility for your child's welfare? Whether it's their academic welfare, that's usually covered, but also their mental health and their sense of self. So it's a conversation we can have, and it wasn't a conversation people were having 30 years ago in schools, but now we can have those conversations. That's one benefit of COVID and lockdowns, was at least now we're talking about mental health, whereas before it was just, don't talk about it. So what else? So we've got calmness, curiosity, compromise, patience, yeah. Support persons being allowed, exactly, yeah. Having more people allowed. Preparation from both parent and school, yeah. Maybe an aid that helps the student or the child, yeah. Sometimes there would be somebody who can do that. And having that continuity as well, that's something else that children really struggle with, is that the relationships are not necessarily continued. So they might have a really close relationship with a primary school teacher who sees them all the time. And if it's a good relationship, that can go really well. But then next year, they don't have any contact with them at all. And that's really unnatural. Or if they don't have a good relationship with that teacher and that's pretty much the only teacher they're seeing for a whole year, that can be really awful. Or if they don't get on with the class. What did Kat say? Okay, you missed the first half. Are there notes or something? I will be sharing the recording from the session, so you can get that. And I'll also save the chat so I can share that as well. I'll find a way of sharing this thing. That's one thing I didn't think about because it's not a slideshow. It's just literally Zoom backgrounds I've added text to. But yeah, there will be at least the video will be up on YouTube in due course. Or you can email me and in fact I'll put my I'll just put my personal email in there, it's fine. If anyone wants to ask any questions afterwards, you can do. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the kind of overview that I was wanting to give and the questions that I wanted to ask. So I'd love to know what are your thoughts or what are your questions? If you've put them in the chat, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or put your hand up if that's more comfortable. Just going to scroll through and see if I've missed or not answered any questions. Yeah, helping the adult son to reframe the school experience. I think these conversations around, these types of questions that we're asking. So things like, what is one thing that you wish that the adults had known about you when you were at school? And thinking about, things, what did you feel proud of? What were your skills? But also what challenges were you facing that maybe people were not aware of? And move back to that one. Find the right background. Might have been that one. Yeah, it's one thing you wish the teachers had known about you. It could also be one thing you wish the parents had known. And actually, if I think back, there are things that I didn't know about myself at the time that only in hindsight I could say, oh, actually, yeah, I was actually very noise sensitive and I didn't realize. Or I'm hypermobile, I have hypermobile joints, which affects my coordination and gross motor skills, which nobody noticed, but it meant sports were really difficult. And I wish that somebody had known that I just needed more support to get to a baseline level of fitness because I fatigue really quickly, or, a baseline level of competence throwing and catching a ball, which my parents didn't pick up on at all because they're not sporty in any way. Um, and then also things like, what your child's dreams. So, what were their dreams that nobody asked about or nobody knew about? And by thinking this through about what you wish that somebody had known, then you can talk about what difference would it have made, or what difference would it make now, or if you could have that conversation now and actually sort of talk through that, role play it, do the two-chair role play of, okay, I'll be the teacher. What do you want to say? And just let them get it off their chest. I've just found that people quite often have so much bottled up, and just talking it through really helps. So, and then taking that into a solution focused direction of what difference might that have made, and then what quite often people then realize that there are things that they could do now that didn't happen. Just because something didn't happen when they were a child doesn't mean that they can't rectify it now. And there's a lovely, quite challenging solution focused question. I can't remember if it's I think it might be from Evan George, who in a training session, he said, um, how long do you want to let your past keep interfering with your future? And there are different ways of phrasing that. But if you notice that someone's past is interfering with their future, what is, how much do they want that to keep continuing? And people aren't sometimes just not aware that that's a choice that they can make. And I don't know if you went to Linda Metcalf's talk a couple of hours ago, but she was talking about the discourse, the internal discourse about that children come out from school with, or while they're at school, particularly teenagers, of how they see themselves and how they realize that other people perceive them, as being the weird kid or the stupid kid or the kid that's always in trouble or the troublemaker, um, the bad kid. And I know people who've carried these stories through until their, 70s and 80s, and they've never really questioned whether they want to keep that story or not. So I think that's some way that we can also help using solution focus to, I think it's just about having that conversation and be confident as well. I think parents, because this work is not easy, but when you give people the questions, they are quite simple. They can work through them. And just ask and have conversations, adult parent, adult child. What was it like when you were in school? What did we miss? What, how do you wish it had been different? And that can be really, really valuable. And also create that trust and teamwork between adult parent and adult child. That can then be more supportive through adulthood. And one of the things I talk about with parents with this is that, we tend to think about school as being sort of finished at 18 or whatever age. And, the exams are the thing, and then they go to college, have a career, rest of life ticked off. Whereas actually, these stories and these beliefs that came up in school, they do shape our self-belief. And if we want to interrupt that, we need to think about school as being a lifetime. Do you have a child who's going to come out of school believing that they're bad at maths, can't draw, and they're only good at, maybe they're good at sports or something else, but there's certain things that they can't do and they just believe that that's the truth. And we're stuck in fixed mindset as opposed to growth mindset. for quite a long time. So, we're kind of free of that now. But being able to actually, one of the exercises I do with parents in the book is asking them to imagine the family future. What are the values? What's the relationship they want to have with their adult child? Which is often something we don't really think about when they're 5 years old, you know. But what is the relationship we want? Do we want to be friends? Do we want them to trust us? What kind of a conversation about school might we have with them when they have children the same age? Because I'm having conversations with my mum who's 80, I'm 50, my kids are 17, and we're talking now about her experience with her mum when she was in school and seeing those patterns through the family cascading down. So, and it feels very kind of cathartic for everybody. So it's never too late to have a happy childhood or to improve your story about your childhood. And just acknowledging reality as well. It's not about saying this didn't happen or oh, I'll just get over it or anything like that. It's about saying, yeah, this happened. It hurt. It went on for a long time. You probably got CPTSD from it. And what can we do now to at least acknowledge that? So what else? How to inspire parents. Yeah, working towards. I think it's giving them confidence that they're not alone. This happens to a lot of kids and a lot of parents. It can feel very isolating. People don't talk about it really. Um, they're not alone. There are things that they can do. And, they can be confident that they will make the right decisions. Parents often know, and also children often know what's right for them. So they have a lot more expertise than they might realize, and they might feel quite intimidated by the school environment, often because of their experience of school was quite intimidating. But with support, they can have those conversations with school and make, change what might have happened in the past, make it into a better experience later. And also, I find that people then think, oh, actually, my friend has got the same problem, or, somebody else, and they start thinking about, and they suddenly realize how common this is. Because almost everybody I've met has, when I tell them this is what I work in, they have a story themselves at school, someone in their family, their own child, or, a close family friend or relative. Some people have, it's so common and people don't realize. So about globally, it's all over the world. Anywhere there's schools and small humans, there are going to be issues. About 10 to 15% of children who are in school at any time are really struggling, like to the point that it's affecting their mental health. So it's, 3 to 5 kids in every class of 30. They're huge numbers. And yet every child is sort of dealt with isolated and the parents feel quite isolated. It's just telling them that it's really common, sometimes a huge weight off their shoulders, and that there are things that you can do. What else? Oh yeah, not responding to emails requesting a meeting. That's something. So not following up on things, agreeing to do something in a meeting, but then not doing it. It can feel very tiring and annoying to have to be persistent, to have to be the squeaky wheel, broken record. But that again is just something that you have to learn to do and realizing that you don't really have a choice because you're the only person as a parent. You're the only person who's responsible for your child. The school is responsible for all the kids broadly, and the squeaky wheel gets the oil kind of thing. They're under-resourced. So your responsibility is to go in and advocate for your child. And also not feel that, because sometimes parents feel, well, other children deserve it more, other children have worse problems, and therefore, my child maybe isn't, their issues aren't so important. So it's about having that confidence to say, look, if you notice they're not happy, then you have every right to go in and do something about it. And then be persistent with that. And nothing makes a school change faster than knowing that you're the parent that's going to call them every single day and that's going to follow up, that's going to take notice in the meetings and make sure that people do what they say. And it's little things like coming out of the meeting, knowing who's agreed to do what by what date. And people will always wriggle out of trying to say by what date. God, okay, fine. Can you do that? Can you do it by Thursday? No, I can't do it by Thursday because whatever. Okay, can you do it by the Wednesday after? Actually nailing people down to say, when is it going to be? And then, put the next meeting in the diary. Okay, let's meet every week on a Wednesday. I'll come in to school every single week. Things will get solved so quickly if you're that persistent. Um, but you kind of have to be sometimes somebody that you don't really want to be. You have to be, and it's difficult. We have to support parents to be that more forceful, persistent, resilient advocate for their child than they might prefer to be. Um, what else we got in the chat? If you have a question and either you can't write it in the chat or you just prefer to say it out loud, you can just put your hand up on the little heart with the react. If you click on the heart, you can raise hand in there. Yeah, understanding is there an aid that could help the student or the child? Is there funding for that? Big problem we have in the UK is that schools will tell a parent that their child would not be eligible for extra support. There's no point in them putting in the application or the waiting lists are too long, etc., etc. And understanding how they want to deal with that because they often won't know what the options are. So there is an element we just have to tell them what the options are. And then also help the parent to work out what their game plan is going to be to get that support. And I ended up taking one of my children out of school because I realized three different schools hadn't been able to meet her needs. So we ended up homeschooling, but not everybody can do that. Suggestions if you have a child that doesn't have a connection with their teacher or counselor or principal. Yeah, this happens a lot. And in terms of my question then would be, okay, suppose there was the connection, exactly how, really great connection that does everything that you want it to do, and whether the child is involved in that conversation or not. But usually the parent has a good idea of what that connection, what difference would it make if they had that connection. So you can use some of the basic solution-focused questions. So if that's a desired outcome, well, it's a means to an end, right? Having the connection is a way of getting to something. So talking about the desired outcome and the preferred future from that. Maybe using a scale of saying, how much of a connection do they have? And really understanding how often do they see each other, and maybe having to go in and be that connector to have the conversation with them. Because there are so many people in a school, especially secondary schools, where there are just lots of people who are in charge of different bits and pieces. And that's where you don't often get the joined up thinking. So if there was that connection, what difference would it make? How might it help your child to be more whatever they've said that they wanted? And then what do you want to do if that doesn't happen? Or given the current circumstances, what do you want to do? What are your options? Because I feel sometimes there just is not enough of a good fit between a certain school and a certain child. Some schools are very rigid, structured. Some schools are very competitive. Some schools are very nurturing and supportive, but might be might feel a bit slow for a child who is actually very competitive. They might prefer that. So we have this strange thing in the UK where people tend to put children into their siblings' school, whether or not it suits them. So um, just understanding is the type of school that this is, not only maybe the teaching style or what facilities they have, but actually their ethos, their values, their priorities. So if your child is very, really needs a lot of nurturing and would benefit from more pastoral support, but the school is just not prepared to engage with them on an emotional level. They're really just about achievement and exams and, sports trophies and very competitive. It's probably not the right school for that child, whether you can do something about it or not. But sometimes, even if you can't get through to the school that they would change anything, and also you're not in a situation where you can take the child into another school or homeschool them. Sometimes just having the conversation with the child and explaining to them, listen, you know, what would be great for you is this, this, and this. And your school is not really aligned with that. And it's really difficult. And how are we going to deal with it? And the fact that the child knows that it's not them, it's actually that there's something happening in the school they're not doing anything wrong as a child. It's the school system that is just not designed to be supportive in the ways that they need. Because one thing I notice is that children and adults who've had difficult schooling tend to think that it's them. They blame themselves, and it's a message they would have got at school that it's them that isn't fitting in, or they're disruptive, or they're not coping, or whatever. They're not good enough in some way. Whereas actually, it's just a mismatch. There's no school right, kid wrong, or kid right, school wrong. It's just a mismatch. So sometimes just knowing that, it's like being in a workplace that doesn't really suit you. But if you thought it was you that was wrong, it would feel much worse than just knowing, okay, this workplace doesn't really suit me, but I'm not going to be here forever. Maybe I can start looking for another job. Or maybe I make plans. Or maybe it's just not a good fit, but I'm going to work around that. And these are things that children don't know of. They don't understand because they don't have the broader cognitive maturity, but also they don't have life experience to be able to know, okay, it's not me, I might be autistic, ADHD, etc., etc. I might find this subject really hard to understand, or I might, be progressing too fast and I'm bored in this class. But it's not me that's the problem. It's just I'm like me and I'm fine. The school system is how it is. Sometimes we're not getting along that well. Um, and hopefully the connection with teacher or principal would be supporting that narrative that the child is okay, and kids do well if they can, and that the child is not made to feel that there's something wrong with them. Great, so I think we finished the session. Thank you so much. I think it's been really interesting to get your feedback. So I hope you enjoy the next session.